The Hunt is no stranger to controversy. Pushed back from its original September 2019 release date, the production team thought that the premise of hunting humans would be sensitive viewing for moviegoers dealing with recent mass shootings in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas at the time. After being shelved for a while, controversy brewed again as conservative outlets condemned the film as being liberal elitist propaganda, with even the president weighing in via Twitter. With barely a week in theaters before being pushed to digital streaming platforms due to social distancing, we can now decide for ourselves what the fuss was all about. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right, this is Ronald, and I am on the couch. Just got finished watching The Hunt, and let's see. Let me pull up my notes here. The Hunt, directed by Craig Zobel, written by Nick Cuse and Damon Lindeloff, starring Betty Gilpin, Ike Barinholtz, Emma Roberts, Hilary Swank, Justin Hartley, Glenn Howerton, and a lot of other people. I'm not going to go down the entire list because it is a pretty big cast, and in some cases it's hard to recognize who to actually note is in the movie, because in some cases it almost feels like what they're doing is a cameo in some cases. And when I say that, I mean like they've been in the movie such a short period of time that it was like, oh, but did you really need to be referenced for this? That was really a starring role. But anyway, lots of controversy surrounding this movie as it came out. And I mentioned this at the top, but it came out at the same time of two mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton. So people were very hesitant about going to see this movie. That being said, now that I've seen it, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. One, because I think that gave the movie a little more power than it actually had. This is a movie that thinks it's saying something deep. So the premise of the movie is that there are liberal elites that bring a bunch of, quote, normal people to a farm or to a manor in order to hunt them for sport. So essentially you've got the liberal elites on one side and the, quote, deplorables on the other. So it's a kind of pushing us to think MAGA folks versus liberal snowflakes. I think this movie thinks it's making a strong commentary because it lampoons both sides, and I think it thinks it's making like some sort of like greater point or making some sort of satirical point that it'll give us time to think about. But the movie it's just not good enough to be doing what it thinks it's doing. That's the problem. You turn on a movie like this, and the first thing I think is, as soon as it starts, I think of movies like Snakes on a Plane, Hostel, The Belko Experiment, all of the Purge series. And you think about, so first of all, it's a crazy premise, and all of those movies have crazy premise. Snakes on a Plane, it's like, what is this about? Snakes on a Plane. That's a little more straightforward, and actually take Snakes on a Plane out of this. It's similar in the fact that this movie is comically gory, same way that Snakes on a Plane was, but that's where the similarities end. Let's think about Hostel, The Belko Experiment, and the Purge movies. The Belko Experiment is a movie about a bunch of office workers who all work in an office who are ordered to kill each other, and then the rest of the movie is them trying to kill each other. The Purge movies are about one day a year in the new world order of the United States. People are allowed to do all kinds of crime in order to get out of their system. So one day all crime is legal, and it really turns into more of a story about how rich people are killing poor people and how that's really what the Purge is about. And then Hostel is about, a bunch of rich people killing whoever they want in some fraternity that they're doing overseas somewhere. So it's in that same vein what they're doing here. It's the same thing, like, hey, let's a bunch of rich and or elite folks killing a bunch of regular folks. Other than that, this movie isn't really, it's not saying much. And I think that's the problem. Like there's a few times where you can tell the writers of the movie have some funny things to say about liberals and conservatives, but it's almost too narrow. There's no nuance there whatsoever. All of the conversation doesn't even feel nuanced. It makes all the liberal elites to be like kind of like whiny. I mean, just basically what you would expect a snowflake to be lampooned and sound like. They're like talking about, somebody says the word guys and someone says guys and this woman responds, huh? And he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be gendered. And it's just a lot of like apologetic behavior, overly inclusive. And when I say overly inclusive, I mean in the way that if you hang out with a lot of liberal folks, you'll find that there's this place we go where there's really no room for forgiveness if people mess up or say things that they don't intend to, or say things that may be considered ignorant, and then somebody comes and kind of scolds them for it, and then they scold other people, and then there's just kind of like a cycle of scolding each other about what we're doing wrong or what people are doing to each other, whether something be transphobic or fatphobic or ableist, so it's all things, it's meant to kind of be, there's that virtue signaling. It's a lot of that. So it's, that's kind of what they're using to make fun of the liberals. But then the problem is the movie doesn't really set up much of the story itself. It doesn't tell me why I should care that or why it's important that these liberal elites are doing this. And it almost feels like, I mean, to be honest, I'm fairly certain that the writers of this movie thought that they had a good idea. They wrote it and then they pitched it as a joke. I'm dead serious. This is what I think happened. They pitched it as a joke and somebody picked it up and they're like, oh, you're going to make this. And they had a lot of fun making it, but it's not a lot of fun watching it. Like the movie, it could be funnier, and lots of times it makes jokes, but I wasn't laughing. And it wasn't because I'm like, I don't think like making fun of people could be funny, or making fun of liberals or conservatives can't be funny, but the jokes themselves they didn't land. You're sitting there watching, and you're just like, that really isn't funny. It's kind of like watching somebody like give a speech and they make a joke and then no one laughs, and it's a joke, but everyone's just like that. That's not funny. And then the speaker is so rattled by that, they just keep going, which makes it even more awkward, instead of like, like a good comedian will be like, oh, well, that didn't go. And then that'll make people laugh. But that in this movie, it just feels like it's just forging ahead, being awkward, but not really funny. It's comically gory, but not really funny. And there's a lot of times where they try to be funny, but it's like, I'm sitting there watching, I'm like, this just isn't, nothing about this is, if you're going to try to be funny about this, I think they should have like went all the way and been way more ridiculous, like leaning into way more absurd. And I think they thought it was absurd enough, but I'm sitting here watching it and I'm like, this feels like it's too grounded in realism for it to be as absurd as y'all want it to be. Maybe they build out the world a little more. Maybe they, do a little bit more tone policing. And I don't know. There's just, I think if I were to sit down and think about it, there's like 100 ways this movie could have been way funnier. But I wrote, it's not funny enough to be funny, which I think that kind of explains it. Like I said, weak commentary. I thought it was boring. There was zero character development. The main character, Betty Gilpin, while she was fun to watch, like beating people up and just kicking butt and taking names for the whole thing, she wasn't really spectacular. And there was a moment I had where I was like, she kind of vaguely resembles Charlize Theron a lot in this movie, but she's not Charlize Theron. And I understand that they're two completely different, great actresses. But sitting there watching, I was like, there's a few times where I was like, did they want to get Charlize Theron for this movie? Because a few times it was like, it seems like she is coming off very Charlize Theron-y. But I don't think that was intentional. But a couple times I was just like, maybe they could have got her for this movie. I don't know. I think just to touch back on the Purge movies, I think the Purge movies do a better job of taking themselves seriously enough that the premise of it, you take the premise seriously, and you take that the movies are taking themselves seriously enough that you buy into it. You buy into that world, even though those movies aren't great and they could be a lot better, but you buy into it a little bit. With this movie felt like, it just felt lazy. It felt like the writing was lazy. It felt like the direction was lazy. It just felt like nobody really, hey, there's a doggy. Dogs are still barking. It just didn't feel, like everybody was like really checked in to do this movie. This felt like something that everybody did like on a weekend off. They're like, oh no, let's have some fun. Let's make a film real quick. Yeah, and I think the lack of character development made me just not care what really happened to most characters. I really, slightly cared about the main character, but that was mostly because I was invested in the movie. And again, I'm sitting on my couch watching this. I would feel completely different about this in a theater. I think in the theater, I would have probably been way more outraged, but because I'm already at home, the only work I have to do is think critically enough about it to talk about it into a mic right now. But if I had to actually get up, get dressed, go to a theater, sit down, and if it's not a recliner theater, I mean, yeah, I don't understand why I would have made it. So I'm saying everything I said, think about everything I just said to say, I don't understand how this movie had any controversy. Not one bit of controversy. I mean, and conservative pundits got upset. Donald Trump tweeted about it. Everyone was like, oh, they just want to make fun of conservatives and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. If you watch this movie, you guys will be like, oh, that's dumb. You guys aren't even doing a good job. There's other movies that are like completely taking down both conservatives and liberals, and the idea of being overly tone policey or overly virtue signally. There's plenty of other places, other outlets that are doing things like that are doing a much, sorry, that are just doing a much better job of that. Now, if you guys are listening to this, if you didn't yawn, that's because you have no empathy. So I just want to point that out. That yawn should have been contagious. You should have also yawned. I don't care if it's on a podcast. Anyway, I don't know. Just sitting there and thinking about it, it kind of frustrated me that there was this much hoopla over a movie that just wasn't even that good. So I wouldn't show this to your kids. If you feel like watching it, if you like run out of other things to watch, go ahead and watch this. But this is $20. So I would not pay $20 to sit on my couch and watch this, because it's okay. It's entertainment for about an hour and a half, but there's probably other things you could be watching that are readily available to you right now. There's other things you could probably, I would say if you can go find The Purge on somewhere, just watch The Purge, and it'll be way cheaper than The Hunt. Watch all three of them. There's three of them, and there's a TV series, if I'm not mistaken. The three movies themselves, which are not that great, are all better than this movie. So yeah, I would, and again, I want to stress, they're not that great, but they're all better than this movie. This movie is a 1.5 of 5 stars, which is my second lowest rating. First lowest still being Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 1 of 5 stars. Just want to echo, that was a trash movie, and Tarantino should not have been celebrated for it. That being said, The Hunt, 1.5 of 5 stars. Yeah. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other ohitsBigRon Studios shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ohitsBigRon. That's at ohitsBigron. If you like this show, check out our If you like this show, check out our sister show, Time Well Spent. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.